Hello and welcome to our Q&A with the Chemical Valley project team. With us today, we have Vanessa Grey, Beze Grey, and Kevin Matthew Wong, who are the creators and inspiration for the show. And we're going to have a little discussion about the production, producing, the issues that it talks about, and we're really excited to get started. So before we get started, could each of you introduce yourself and your role or connection to the project, where you're tuning into this conversation from, and anything else you would like our viewers to know?
I'll start. My name is Kevin Matthew Wong. My pronouns are he, him. I'm a Hakka Chinese Canadian theater creator, generally making work about climate justice and trying to get that to intersect with theater performance. I came to this project 4 or 5 years ago after first visiting the Chemical Valley through the Toxic Tour that Vanessa and Beze organized. And ever since, it's been a really exciting and fulfilling and kind of life-changing experience to create this show. So that's kind of where I'm coming from today. And I'm also at my parents' house in Markham, Ontario. That's where I'm joining you from.
Okay, I'll go next. Ani Bojo Beze Grey Disnakas Makon Dodam Aamjiwnaang Donjiba Anishnaabe Dao Onaida Dao Lenape Dao Anishnaabe Dao. So hi, hello, my name is Beze. I come from Aamjiwnaang First Nation. I am Bear Clan and I am like a mixie from down there. So Anishnaabe, Lenape, and Oneida. And I'm also identify as Two-Spirit. And so I go by they, them. And this is like a identity that I hold within an Indigenous community. And this is a Indigenous identity as being Two-Spirit. And yeah, it's like much more than a sexuality. It's like a very life-based thing. And just to give like some context behind that. But yes, I am what a Two-Spirit is.
Thank you. And where are you tuning in from?
I'm tuning in from Tiny Township, and yes, it is called Tiny. And that is on the Georgian Bay. It's my partner's homelands, and I'm living with them on their homelands and making it like my own home space now too with them.
Hi, I'm Vanessa Grey. I'm Anishnaabe from the Aamjiwnaang First Nation. I am Bear Clan. And I am in Toronto right now, where I live.
So I have seen the show at several iterations. So I saw this last iteration and I saw it several years ago, and I heard about it from its early infancy phases, I think. So Kevin, I guess the first question for you is kind of, at what point did you go from being like, this is really interesting and something I'm really excited about, to being like, this would make theater? Like, why was theater the medium that really spoke to you for this specific issue?
That's a great question. Well, actually, I had heard about the Chemical Valley maybe now, 8 years ago. So when we first started this company called Broadleaf Theater, we wanted to make work about climate change using the genre of theater. And I saw this documentary and it was really powerful, but we didn't have a personal connection to the community. You know, there wasn't really an in for us to talk about this issue. It wasn't right. It was interesting, but we couldn't make work about it. We were trying to make work about other things. And so maybe one anecdote that I can provide you is we really hit a wall, actually. We were creating work as very earnest, at that point, like essentially earnest teenagers trying to talk about climate in theater. But we hit a point where our work was really shallow because we didn't have Indigenous perspectives. And how can you sincerely interact with environmental issues on this land, this stolen land of Canada, without Indigenous perspectives in your work? And we got to that realization when we were creating these works. There were 3-minute short plays, and each one was talking about a different environmental topic that related to the context of Canada. But something about the show felt really shallow. And so we got to speak, luckily, with this company called Aamjiwnaang Storytellers, which is on Manitoulin Island. And we spoke with their artistic director at the time, Joe Ozibine. And I asked Joe, like, we really want to talk specifically about the boil water crisis at the time. And, you know, what can we do about it? And he laughed and he said, yeah, you probably shouldn't make it theater in the traditional sense about this topic. It's totally not your story. But maybe the most powerful thing you can do is talk about it, sincerely talk about it from who you are, understand who you are first, And maybe there's no art in the traditional sense to it, but that's the first step. Can you talk about it sincerely? And so we created this play that was actually longer than 3 minutes because we thought it deserved more time. And that became a piece that really resonated with people in that show. And then coincidentally, after we produced that at the Toronto Fringe, I got to Sarnia and Aamjiwnaang, as I mentioned. And I was at the Toxic Tour, and I was really amazed that Beze and Vanessa were leading the Toxic Tour because I had learned about them in this documentary 3 years ago. And at the time, Vanessa had also done this really noteworthy climate action in which she and two friends had shut down the Line 9 pipeline. And at that time, Vanessa's legal charges were very much alive. And we wanted to ensure that we were telling people about Vanessa's action and that they were able to see Vanessa's action as urgent and necessary, and also to humanize Vanessa as a climate activist. I think too often we don't humanize the people that we see on screen that are trying to do work for everybody. And so I approached Vanessa and asked her if she thought theater might be an avenue that we could use to kind of speak with people in more depth about these topics. And I'm very lucky that I had her trust, strangely. And from that, we kind of did several different iterations to kind of test the material. And it started as a 10-minute piece that was really about that legal case. And eventually it expanded to the 70-minute piece that is hopefully about many, many different things all in one digestible package.
I guess Vanessa then, and Beze, you guys, as he said, he found you guys through a documentary. So you've clearly had your story told a variety of different ways. What was the experience with Kevin coming to you and earnestly asking about a theater piece? Do you guys have experience with theater? What was your hesitancies? What were you really on board with? How did that first pitch go for you guys?
I like Kevin had mentioned at the time I had charges, and there was like a clear divide between like the industry, the companies, the like Canadian public, and the impacts that Indigenous communities, but like everybody really faces, but there's like so much politics that like make it hard to bridge these conversations when it comes to talking about the climate, but also how it plays into like the everyday life of the Canadian, and how it can seem like an attack. Like I think Canadians feel like attacked when we question the loyalty to the oil industry. And like me and Beze spent a lot of our time educating and showing them what like our life is like, where we come from, what we're used to, what's like how we see the oil industry every day in our backyard. Growing up in Aamjiwnaang. And I think when Kevin approached us, it was like another way to educate without putting me and Beze in every single classroom out there, or every single way to like share this, because it's us sharing our story, but it's really the responsibility of Canadians to feel to do something about it. And like that's what I was excited about when someone was interested in a new way, a new platform for this message.
For me, I feel like it was just kind of like introduced as like Vanessa's like, we have a meeting in Toronto and we're gonna meet this person who wants to make a play like about Chemical Valley. And it was like really interesting, because it was like, I feel like at the Toxic Tours, one thing I try and like say to people, because they're always like looking for Indigenous people to be like, hey, like, what do I do? Like, I like just found out that like Indigenous people are even impacted by climate change. And they always look upon like Indigenous people like, how do I solve this problem? What do I do? What is solidarity? And one thing that you can always like push like across them is like, I have no idea what your capacity is, or like what your time or anything can look like, or even like what is like accessible to you, like anything like that. But it's also like, where are spaces and things that you can like make change or at least bring up these topics and start talking about them, or like any kind of thing like that, where it's like, how can this be introduced into spaces and how can you actually be like helping these types of things, talking about these things. And so that was something that was really interesting, where it was like play was like introduced as an idea, and I was like, that's so cool. And then I remember joking with Kevin and Vanessa like right away. I was like, so are you gonna wear like a wig? And like when you're Vanessa, just put on the wig, and then when you're me, just like rip off the wig and like do different aspects. But like and then we just talked about ideas, and it was really cool when like we mentioned some ideas. Like one of my ideas was like giving out a piece of candy in a way, like to get people to like look at a website and like get something for them to like take home, and like it just kind of gets them to like think about that and look at that and have something to take home as well. And so that was like really interesting how like it got built and how it became like everyone's like idea, and how Kevin's like, and this is how it's going to be magically and amazingly on stage. And it was so exciting to see the first time, and it's really like grown and changed and altered, and like it's truly a masterpiece that we've all done.
Yeah, it's amazing. I think I'm so impressed with how smart it is. Like every time I see it, it's so smartly done of how you pull the pieces together and like craft the story throughout. But I really appreciate the perspective of it, like that it's not, I feel like a lot of theaters, like, we're going to tell you what's right and what's wrong. And you sit there and you do feel attacked because you're like, well, clearly you're putting me in this category without knowing me or who I am, or you're assuming the other side. And so I really appreciate that Kevin, sorry, look at your name. I really appreciate that you framed it all from your perspective of your journey. But it's very interesting dichotomy that you allowed Vanessa and Beze's voices to be so present in the show. Was that a decision from the beginning that that was an important integral thing in terms of telling the story, letting them tell their own side of the story? Or is that a narrative theatrical convention that came up throughout the process?
Yeah, I can speak to maybe, I think it was the same meeting, or maybe the meeting that was just before, that was just with Vanessa, in which we talked about form. And I think we were maybe it was 3 minutes to 5 minutes of just discussing, would it be appropriate to have other actors play Vanessa and Beze? And pretty soon we realized, no, actually it's very alive. I think it's most impactful and it's most full and accurate coming from Vanessa and Beze's voice. And I guess for me as the creator was, of course, the two intentions of, let's make sure that we're honoring Vanessa and Beze's time, that they're not needing to retell these stories every single time, and that the way that we edit these stories honor the core of these stories so that people really understand that. And then the second part of it is, how do we make the audience feel that they understand what this feeling was like in this meeting, and how do we, for example, if there was fun, if there was laughter, they should feel that. How do we get a sense of Vanessa and Beze's personality across to an audience? And that was also really intentional in the sense that we wanted to make sure that we were counteracting these news stories, and where you might just see an image of, a protest, and of course people have their own associations with protests. Mine are very positive, but we know that that's not the case with everybody. But the challenge is to make sure that we're humanizing people that are taking part in these actions, and that we just get a sense of who they are. I think that was a big part of that decision, and it was a quick one, and it came quite early, I would say, in terms of ensuring that the stories stay within Vanessa and Beze's voice as the best way to convey them.
That was a pretty solid answer. Do you, either of you want to add to it, or?
I've always been like impressed because, like Kevin mentioned, it was just like, I think it was both of us taking a chance on each other when we first met, and like I didn't really know him at all before like agreeing to meet with him, and like it just felt like there was like my space and time was respected, and so I didn't like leave right away. It was like I wanted to like have like a complete meeting with this person, and every time he came back, he had something really solid and really tangible, and like really like something like I'm not a theater person, and I think that's why this is cool for me, because he would come back with just like suggestions and ideas, and this is something I can visualize myself, not being a theater person, and feeling like, yeah, like that I can totally see and hear and feel what you're describing to me. And so it was definitely like not like anyone could have like taken this on, and like obviously for Kevin and Julia, it was a process. It was a process of like doing their own homework and not like meeting with me and asking all these questions that like you can Google. Like that wasn't the case. And so that's where I felt like as an Indigenous person with the work I do, like my time didn't feel wasted. And so I think it was just really cool to like be able to feel like invited and involved in theater, because I also feel like as a not theater person, like it doesn't feel inviting and it doesn't feel like something I would just jump into, but like it's nice to feel like we can like coincide and we can welcome each other in like both worlds. And that's why I think there's so much like mishmash in the show.
I feel like in the show it was like really cool where like it was like we had like like conversations with Kevin, and like these stories would be told or we would be talking about our experience, and then for Kevin to take that and then like all of a sudden make it like flourish on a stage kind of thing. Like you think like sometimes theater could be like limiting, and like definitely how like a documentary is limiting where it's like you only get what you filmed and what you talked about. But like on theater it could be just like so creative where like I told a story of like my mom's childhood bedroom, and then all of a sudden it appeared in the show, and just like our toxic tours appeared in the show as this cute like little bus. And it was like so cool how these things could become like beautifully visual, but we could also still get the same point across, and it could be engaging, and like people could understand it like more in a different way.
I'm gonna transition over to some other conversations first, but just before we leave like the theatrical form for now, do you guys find that there's a big crossover between the oral storytelling that's in a Anishnaabe tradition, or is this more of just a Kevin's hybrid that he has created? I feel like there's certain parts where it really feels very much like it's honoring that oral storytelling tradition, but I don't know if that's just my outside impression or if that's something that you guys feel it does have that resonance.
I think it's quite hybrid, in a way that, there's not like there's no like that kind of, it toes a line, right? I think like we're not trying to appropriate, like Anishnaabe oral storytelling is its own tradition. That's a beautiful tradition and can be experienced in a fullness of form. I think the closest that it gets to an oral storytelling world is actually the final moment, or one of the final moments with the hummingbird story.
Yeah.
And rather than like trying to kind of, I guess what we were trying to show was the process by which a story is provided to somebody, and then the way of honoring the carrying forward of that. So in a way, maybe it's more the process than the form, but certainly like in terms of like we never tried to say like this is Anishnaabe oral storytelling and we're going to incorporate it in a certain way. Maybe one last thing before I pass it to Vanessa and Beze is, however, there was a concerted rejection of what we perceive traditions of documentary theater are in Canada, and what well-funded documentary theater sometimes looks like in Canada, for which there is a removal of the person from their story. And so for us, that was really very important. And there was a rejection of the fact that the storyteller could be perceived as neutral. That was very much something that the forum was responding to.
I feel like Anishnaabe storytelling, like there's such like a limit when you're talking about even like environmental impacts, because like our stories didn't really have that before like colonization or anything. Like our language doesn't even have words for climate change, and we're losing some words to like climate change, where it's like when I talk about the land, I talk about it very differently than my grandma did when she was growing up and she was speaking Anishnaabe. And that is something that's like really heartbreaking about um, being here today, is like that things are shifting and changing, and like and for us to even speak our language is like being impacted with how we're talking about this kind of issue of like climate change, environmental racism, industry impacting Indigenous people. And that's something that's like, that wasn't even in our stories, our Anishinaabe stories, but it's like, it can be like, we're talking about like a hybrid of like, it can be a documentary, it can be incorporating the way that Indigenous people are storytellers, and like, and educating in a way, and becoming something that's really powerful and impactful. Like, because the main thing that you want from this is for people to walk away like at least knowing about Chemical Valley and how Canadians are impacting Indigenous people in this way, and like what they're going to do with that after that.
I think the correlation between Anishinaabe storytelling and this like form of theater is the fact that it's building a community. And like we could often, like even nowadays as Indigenous people, can name the elder we got this teaching or this story from, and it's all about like who you know within community, and how that strengthens like that story or that teaching. And so this theater production helps build me and Beze's like community, like outside, like Aamjiwnaang people who like feel that Chemical Valley is phasing out. It's like completely colonial and evil, and like all of these things, like how like it feels like the companies just being companies like can hide all of this evil behind like paychecks or behind like the liberal government claiming that this is what we need and this is what it means to be Canadian. And we're here to say that no, that's not what it means to be Canadian. And it doesn't have to. And there's so, it's like such a unpopular opinion that we often feel outnumbered by companies alone that are on our territory. And so it does feel nice to feel that people have said like, you know, like I'm into theater and I've heard about Chemical Valley and it's such a great show. And it was so great to like learn about like your work. Like those are like members of our community that we probably wouldn't have reached without this like theater project.
Thank you. Kevin, can you just define for our audience then how you would define docu-theater?
Sure. I don't even know if we fit into the form that other people would consider documentary theater. I mean, some level of using recorded media, I think, is essential in what would be considered documentary media. Acknowledgement of storyteller, I think, is important. Like, it's not necessarily like a well-made play type structure. It's a structure for which there's, you know, that somebody's trying to get something across to you, or they've gone through a process of change. And then that there's some sort of usually live audience. I know we're in COVID times, but those would probably be my three components.
I love that you kind of slid into there that they've gone through a process of change.
Yeah,
like,
I think so.
One person's narrative, process of change, but that seems like a pretty integral part of docu-theater. And it seems like that's part of the big rejection that you guys had, is if you have an impersonal narrative coming from someone who's removed from the story, that they're not necessarily going through that process of change. So it's much more likely to fall into kind of that didactic theater piece where it's like, we're telling you what's wrong, as opposed to this is various sides of the experience from my own perspective.
Yeah. And there's also one thing that I have not liked, and I'm not naming specific theater pieces, but there's the sense of like the storytellers going through it, and they're like, they have this moment where they're like, oh, this is so wrong. this is wrong. Like, I need to tell people that this is wrong. But we start with the fact that this is wrong. And like, let's not, this is wrong. Like, now what? I think that's what this piece is trying to do. That one of the first things is most Sarnians don't live by these factories, and Aamjiwnaang does. That's a fact. Let's move on. Where can we move from here? Because we're not trying to convince somebody who isn't on board with the fact that the foundations of this thing are factual and they're wrong. so then how do we move forward? I think is really something in the DNA of this piece that is maybe a little bit different than building a story around the idea of an expose, which I think is a fault of some documentary theater work.
Well, it's really interesting to use it as like the kickoff as opposed to the climax. Like,
exactly.
The story is going to be more in depth if that's not the revelation. Both of you guys have, I don't know if you've consciously done it or just talking about it, you've talked about internet and Google. So obviously it comes up several times that Kevin is a keen Googler in his research for this piece. Throughout the piece, it gets mentioned several times, but let's talk first about your work, Beze and Vanessa, and how the internet is a factor for that. I think a lot of high school students and elementary students right now, they're getting driven home the message that like your message goes wider. So like thinking about the safety online and what type of images you share that could be pushed out there in cyberbullying, as opposed to actually the great wealth of information and the fact that now you guys are able to tell your own stories without having like the media have to filter it. So I just wanted to talk about that. You can take that question however you want, but just how the internet has really impacted or been detrimental to your work.
Like, I feel like a lot of my research and stuff was like archival and with the internet somewhat, where it's like certain things that I got was like searching up like a lot of these companies and really understanding like, what do they make? What, like, how, like, why is there so many like in my community? And like, why do people feel like this is so important? And finding out like that, like, a link CO that's like right across from our band office makes rubber, and that was based on like during the war, pretty much rubber trees couldn't supplement like as much rubber as they needed for things like even the atomic bomb. And this was like in World War II. And so what they did was they made a synthetic rubber out of byproducts from petroleum to make the atomic bomb. And then they started using rubber for like tires, like our winter tires, our summer tires, all season tires. Like that's just one example. And as well as in food, like chewing gum. Juicy fruit chewing gum is made from the same rubber that is made in our backyards. And so it's like those are things that like I learned from like research that I've done, where it's like I learned from the companies and stuff like that. I'm like, why is it like so important that these companies are here and doing all this stuff? And it's like, oh, actually, it's not really that important. It's like consumerism, it's like capitalism, and it has to do with like the sadness, which is like the Indian agents forcing like taking away all of our rights and using Indian agents as the people who like sold off our land and like did like sketchy things where they would like they would be the ones that were able to speak English, and so our community not being able to speak fully like English, they would like give one number and then they would go back to us and they'd be like, oh my God, they're gonna offer you, and I don't have like the right numbers at the time, but it's like they're gonna offer you $700 for like this plot of land. And they'd be like, that's a good deal, when really they were getting like 13,000 or something like that, where they would be like pocketing a lot of money. And so it's like things like that, where it wasn't just Google that helped me out, to be honest. I had to do a lot of like research, and I had to do a lot of my own things of like, this knowledge isn't very known. And just like the knowledge of like what these products are doing to Indigenous communities, that's not known enough. And so being a young person, a young two-spirit person, I've been doing this since like I was in grade like 9. Like I started learning about it, and I was like, it's important for there to be youth advocates and talking about this, and I'm comfortable talking about this, whereas some youth aren't. And I very much started like crying in front of crowds, like talking about like Chemical Valley really impacts my life and it sucks. Like it's in my backyards. And so like that was something that was really heavily impactful. as well as like when I was younger, I would do things like there was this billboard that was in Chemical Valley, and it used to say, it was like for Jeep, and it said, "Take the scenic route," and it was like all of Chemical Valley in the background. And so one thing I did was I took a picture of that, and then I posted it online, and literally a week later they took down that billboard, and they like no longer had it up. And so it's like it's kind of a hit or miss, and it's kind of an interesting question. I definitely wasn't ready or like knowing how to answer it, but I guess that's the way I'm going to answer it, is like definitely do a lot more of your own research, especially when it comes to like Indigenous issues. Like there's a whole background on it, and you should be listening to the people being impacted, because we have such a different experience than like what Google will actually give you. um and yeah, do proper research.
I guess I kind of don't understand the question.
You can interpret it however you want. I guess my question is, for instance, Kevin saw the videos of the flares happening, and that was what, like the documentary, then that kind of brought him to Chemical Valley. Versus if it was traditional media before the internet, then the newspapers would have to choose to cover that or not, or the news, like the mainstream news, would have to decide. Versus now, you're able to tell your story how you want through the internet. So on one hand, it can be a very powerful tool for you, and then on the other hand, it could also be that you're now opened up to huge backlash, because it's just that much bigger a community that can find you and react. So I think it's just a question, I guess, is like how you navigate that relationship in your work, knowing that students are learning about the internet and like they use it for social media and TikTok, and some people are finding ways to get actively engaged, and some people are still, like they know how to ask Siri, but they're not going to necessarily do a deep dive. I don't actually know where that question is going, so please just like take it however you want. And if you don't want to answer, that's also fine.
Like, I feel like Indigenous people are always going to experience anything different than, let's just say, the average Canadian. I started a court case against Imperial Oil through a flaring incident that Beze and I happened to like experience ourselves. And when like we see flares so big, we usually stop and take a picture, because the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change here in Ontario needs proof that something goes wrong. And so the use of the internet and like the backlash that comes with that is very real for me and Beze. It's not like cyberbullying by any means. It's like having the OPP harass me on a regular basis. It's me taking Imperial to court and then having it be turned away from the current person in power, Doug Ford. Me and Beze are very much in the middle of everything. And I think we've like agreed to like take this challenge in a very public way, because we were just born into it, and we see the effects and we feel the effects all the time. We don't have to be like in Aamjiwnaang to be worried about like our grandparents there and our family, and we feel very connected to our homeland always, but there's aging infrastructure that is there. There's continuous like questionable chemicals and questionable amount of those chemicals going out. And so like what we experience is very much like, super intense and triggering. Like we don't ever get much of a break when it comes to like speaking out against multinational like oil giants.
I really appreciate both of your answers and how honest they are and authentic. I think that's not something that a lot of theater Q&As necessarily get as the response. So I really appreciate you guys sharing that. I think I'm going to jump the gun on you, Kevin. You can speak in just a second, but it does sound like there's definitely the, people are like, don't believe everything you see on the internet, but it sounds like you're also able to use it to hold companies accountable, and how you're like hold the ministry accountable by sending pictures and stuff like that. So it is empowering, I think, to remind young people that their phone is not just to take selfies, but their phone can actually be part of the activism and part of creating the change that they want to see if they're pointing it in the right direction. So thank you for sharing that. Kevin, you want to jump in with your Google Internet yays and nays?
Sure. Yeah, I think the internet is something that is really exciting and terrifies me at the same time. The internet is absolutely the reason why this piece came together, and that I found out about the Toxic Tour through a Facebook event, and I also saw Vanessa's live stream of that flaring incident from home, and that was added another layer of reality in that, like, this is my friend experiencing this thing in real time. And there's I think the reason why that video made it into the show was, for me, there was this intense feeling of closeness and distance. And I wonder if other people feel this way too when they're on their phones. Like, we have this perception that we can be close together, but what's extreme about this instance is these are my friends experiencing this thing that's incredibly harmful and dangerous to their community. And yes, I can know it, but I can't know it. And so there's also work to be done if you want to make your interaction with the internet a truthful living thing. Like, and I can never know what that evening was like. I can imagine that it was terrifying to be there, but there's inevitably a gap of knowledge. So the internet can only get you so far. One of the final lines of the show is, I think this show has been about knowledge and understanding. And for me, I think those Google segments represent knowledge, and spending time with Vanessa and Beze represent understanding. And it takes synthesizing those ideas and time and energy and empathy to get to the fact, to get to a point in which you actually feel that you're in living relationship with these concepts. But when they're just on a web page, it's a bit harder. So I guess if, I know there's students watching this, I guess what I would say is make sure that you understand that everything that you're viewing is not sufficient on its own online. It's never sufficient on its own. It all exists in larger context and larger context and larger context, which is something that this show is trying to do. Each story exists in a larger context. These stats don't exist just as the factories make these things. They make these things and they also harm this community. So everything is interconnected. And the challenge is we have language that we're so interconnected by the internet, but we really have to acknowledge the real distance that it creates at the same time that we acknowledge the opportunity. And I think we feel that much more. You get to see what your friends are having for dinner, or where they're, I don't know, going for their COVID distanced walk, and that's all great. But just to acknowledge that gap and to put everything into a wider context is really important. And the internet cannot replace all the time that Vanessa, Beze, and I spend together.
It's a really nice through line that you guys have mentioned several times and throughout the show, is that it is, the essence of understanding is about the relationships. And the reason this can come is because you put the time into developing the relationships, and that if you want to create something meaningful or really dig into understanding an issue, it does take the time and the energy and doing your own homework and coming back to share what you've learned independently. It's not always just expecting, the Siri response. Siri can't just tell you every answer. So I think that that's a wonderful takeaway from what you guys have been talking about. We're getting close to the time, so I would really like to respect your time and not go on too much longer. I guess one big question right now is that this play has been in development for so many years and has toured quite a bit as well. So you've had, Canadian audiences, you've had European audiences, across Canada has different perspectives. And then even just in this past year, like I don't know if it's just my own personal news feed, but I've noticed that Indigenous Indigenous issues are becoming more common, and I find that the conversation is less one-sided than it used to be, I think, even when I first heard about the Chemical Valley project. So can you guys speak to the evolution of the project and how it's received in different areas, or how it's now growing with the times, I guess? Or is it timeless?
Good question, Katie. I can speak to that a little bit. Just in that the piece is always alive, and it comes from the fear that I always am scared that it's not alive. I think if people watching the see theater, sometimes you sit in a theater and you're like, oh, this show is really boring, or oh, this show doesn't relate to the time anymore, because the typical theater process to put on a show could be up to 4 years of different processes before it actually gets to stage. For us, we wanted to make sure that it felt in relationship with whatever is happening in the news at the time, and beyond that it primarily feels alive, I would say. And in that sense, it's never complete. We're always swapping in and out different sections. We always want to clarify if something's not as clear as it can be for an audience. We're always taking audience feedback and trying to reincorporate that. For every different city that we're in, we acknowledge where we are, but also we try to think about, in that city, what's the conversation like? So for example, like when we were in Peterborough, we know that community that goes to see the theater is a bit more engaged with Indigenous issues. And we had one of our friends who is Anishnaabe Algonquin, and consulted on that version with us, and had some inclusion of some of her knowledge in the show there. So each version is a bit refined as much as possible. And then if you saw the digital version, then the context was a little bit more about this relationship, like, and the camera, and trying to get you the same feeling of intimacy. And that was our real challenge. But yeah, as we keep going, our challenge, I think, is just to keep it alive, keep honoring the audience that has chosen to spend time with us. I think that's a real duty that I feel every time I step on stage. It's kind of like, you don't know me. Like, you just have to trust that this thing is going to entertain you and educate you for like 70 minutes, you know? And I think that's a big responsibility. And as a theater creator, one thing that scares me the most is I know if we mess it up, people don't come back. And I think it's like, how many people do we know that say, I don't go because I saw this one show that didn't feel, wasn't entertaining, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I think what they're really saying is they didn't honor me. And I never want anybody to leave the show feeling as though their intelligence isn't honored, their ability to bring them their full selves into the show isn't honored, because we need that to do this work. We need that to understand the difficult history of this country and to try to enact things that move forward. And so the show's never done, I think.
I'm really impressed that you guys have like refrained from tinkering too much. I feel like if it was me, the show would have gone from 70 minutes to 2 hours, because I'd be like, no, we have to tell them about this. We have to add this in.
That's a fun challenge, yeah.
Beze or Vanessa, anything to add to the evolution of the show experience?
I think it's just always gonna be relevant, because like the issues me and Beze like really just talk about all the time are the root issues to like the whole like capitalist imperialist like society we find ourselves all like in this pandemic and quarantined in right now. Like it's related to climate change, like it's integral to climate change, it's foundational to what Canada is. It's exactly what Indigenous communities are still faced with. There are communities out there who still don't have like clean drinking water. Like it's always going to be an issue, because it's what the like great country of Canada is. It's genocidal to the environment, to the water, and inherently like Indigenous people that come from that land and water. And so like to the very roots, this is always going to touch on those issues, those newsworthy issues that are always going to be an issue, because it's only going to get worse from here.
I'm just going to say that I appreciate both what Kevin, Vanessa, and I have nothing to add.
I would like to say on behalf of the Rose and on behalf of everybody who's going to be watching this, I really appreciate you taking your time and sharing your experiences beyond the show, but the creation and your personal life stories with us. Is there anything that you guys would like to add as like a final thought or question for people to take away from this, or challenge, or anything that you'd like to say? This is your chance.
I'll just add a one sentence, which is like, don't be afraid of discomfort. The discomfort is probably step one, and the rest of the work is the most important part. And if you can't get past that first part, you won't get to know all the amazing stuff that comes afterwards and the difficult stuff. But really, the life-changing stuff doesn't start or stop at discomfort.
Yeah, I agree with Kevin. Like, getting used to discomfort and like unsettlement of like the idea of like that Canada isn't like this great state that like honors Indigenous people. In fact, there's a lot of genocide with Indigenous people, and a lot of us are like really trying to communicate like these things are wrong. This is still happening in Canada, and there is a terrible, terrible history with Canada and Indigenous people. But we are resilient, and we're still here, and we're still resisting. And it's about time that Canadians, settlers, start like trying to like empower Indigenous people and like help in like different ways, and not just like leaving it up to Indigenous people to keep like, we're educating you to like actually make change.
Good call to action. Vanessa, do you have anything else?
No, thanks for having me.
So once again, this is Beze, Vanessa, and Kevin from the Chemical Valley Project by Broadleaf Theatre. Thank you so much for tuning in. We really hope that you learned a lot today and that you take action, sit with the discomfort, do your research, have your stories and your meaningful connections with people outside of Google. And we hope to see you back at the theater soon.